it was by osmosis. I'm urban planner, but I was also love dogs. So I walked my normal neighbourhood, and then one day I came across my first dog park, and that was probably 6 years ago, and went with my dog inside, and I was intrigued by how people use the space, how people and dogs use the space. Where do they stand? How do they flow through in the park? And I suppose at that time I wasn't particularly impressed with what I saw. So I thought, okay, let me go and see some others. And so we ended up seeing all the ones in South Australia. So I've probably seen over 45 dog parks. I thought that we could do a lot better if we were going to plan for our pets in the urban environment. And that's how I started to get into it. I wanted to look at how we could improve on them. The first dog park in South Australia was built on Canalpin, so it was on the freeway between Adelaide and Melbourne, and in some way it's probably what I would say a little bit ahead of their time in terms of pet-friendly travelling. That dog park is probably only something like 200 square metres, so it's pretty small. It's a bit like a sheep run, a real small sheep run. But with the evolution of dog parks from that one, and that was probably like 25 years ago, to now we have something like 55 fenced dog parks in all of the state. The other thing with how the parks have changed, besides the separate areas, is the type of amenities that they start to have in there. So we do start to now see that there's probably more active and more passive spaces, and that's very much what I like to see in them, so that we're creating areas where the dogs can run, but we're creating other little nooks in the park where it might be with more planting, so that it's more of a passive space. So if the dogs don't want to do that high running, or then they can have more one-on-one with the owner, or just a one-on-one experience with the dog. So I like to look at the interactions between the dogs themselves, between the dogs and the humans. And some of the key elements that I'd look at is the size of the park is the first thing. If the park is too small, I will try and push to get it bigger, because one of the first things you see in dog parks is that you'll see that the ground surfaces, if it's turf, it will be pretty much trashed in a couple of months. How do we try and get people to move around the space, because it's an enclosed space? How do you get movement through the space within that? So through design and designing circulation paths, we can do that. I like to look also at how do we get people through what I call the high traffic areas, is through the entry exit gates, but be able to move them into the park proper, as opposed to them congregating near the entry exit points. So I don't like to put the shelters, the water fountains too close to the entry points. The dual water fountains, and having the dog bowl with the tilt bowl, and I think having the tilt bowl and that it's more circular, that is probably one of the better ways to go, because you're not getting the mold build up. It's much easier to flick when you're in there as a user. Having more natural types of things like logs and rocks in there as a way to add sort of an enrichment type area for the dogs. And of course then it's some of the standard amenities that companies make in terms of the shelter pavilions, the seating. But with the seating, I always like to have seating with the back, because you don't want the dog jumping up onto a seat without, and then just staying there, because often without the back they can just sit up there and then just go off the other side. So I always like a seat with the back on there. It's not actually a design work, but it's one of the current ones that I'm doing, and it's looking at a trial, because I'm writing up the report for them, and it's for Alexandrina Council, for around greyhounds to be off leash just at only certain times, because under state law they can never go off leash ever in their life. And it's just a 6 months trial that's finished. So I've got the pleasure of actually writing up the learnings and what worked and what didn't work, so that we can hopefully inform others that might want to do something similar.